Welcome to the Menopause and Cancer podcast, where we speak with cancer patient survivors and incredible experts in their fields to help us find solutions to our symptoms and ideas to improve our health. My name is Danny Binnington, and in today's episode, I want to find out what the hype is all about when people bang on about wearing blood glucose monitors. Do you need to wear one? Should you wear one? What does it actually tell you? Or are we adding and shining too much of a laser focus on one particular area of our nutrition? I am delighted to be joined by Dr. Sarah Berry for today's episode. She is an associate professor at King's College London, and she's run more than 30 human nutrition studies. And most notable, she is the lead nutritional scientist for Predict, ZOE's Predict study, and that was the world's largest in-depth nutritional research program. Sarah has been on the podcast before. She's amazing. And let's get on with it. I really want to know what we can do about our blood sugar levels, how important they are, and should we all worry and carry one of those blood glucose monitors. Sarah, we made it. Welcome back to the Menopause and Cancer podcast. It's great to have you. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. I love your podcast, Danny. So you're great for a morning chat.
Well, we only have half an hour. I've got loads of questions. We don't need more than that, but your clever little brain has got a lot of answers for us that we have been dying to ask you, Sarah. So thank you for your time. Many of the people listening to our conversation have been working incredibly hard over the last 2 years of weekly podcast episodes, of changing their diet, maybe their lifestyle, of implementing exercise, of looking at complementary therapies. These amazing warriors out there are working really hard of putting together a positive, powerful lifestyle toolkit for them, especially when menopause comes after cancer. Often hormone replacement therapy isn't an option. And we have a few worries and a few concerns. The main worry is that there is a narrative out there that says once you're in menopause, your blood sugars go up. And there is a lot of talk about blood sugars out there. And there is all these people wearing blood glucose monitors. And we think, oh my gosh, is that going to be us? Is that true? Does a menopausal body make your blood sugars go up?
So it is true. Our own research has found that when you are postmenopausal or perimenopausal, your blood sugar response to a particular food is higher than if you're premenopausal. And this is even in age-matched individuals. What's so difficult in any research relating to the menopause is to disentangle what's related to aging and what's related to the loss of estrogen. And so we've conducted some research in our own ZOE Predict cohort where, because of the size of the cohort, we are able to age match individuals to look at what's related to estrogen rather than what's related to age. And we do see, even when you match individuals on age, there is a higher blood sugar response to a standard meal compared to if you're premenopausal. But I think I would want to caution that with a couple of points. One is that yes, it's larger, but it's not huge. So I would be concerned if people are suddenly all wearing CGMs just because they're like, oh my gosh, I'm in the menopause status, and this is the be all and end all. It's not. So that's the first thing I would caution, that yes, it's different, but I don't think it's large enough to cause significant concern. But it's of a size that, yes, maybe we can suggest some sort of strategies to reduce it. The other thing that I would caution as well is that it's just one thing that changes in menopause. There's many other things that change, and I wouldn't be over-focused just on your blood sugar. But in a positive way, we can do something about it as well.
And we want to get to that because in our previous conversation, you gave us brilliant hacks, and it was very much about also when you ate and how you ate rather than just what you eat. And so we'll get to that. Take us back a little bit, because there is a little bit of criticism on my social media feed about blood glucose monitors, about focusing too much maybe on that blood glucose response. And many people say, well, it's normal. Every time you eat, your blood sugars go up and it's your body's natural reaction. So what's the big deal of focusing on it? What is the big deal?
So, firstly, I would say your readers are spot on that it is normal. It's a normal physiological response to eating any kind of carbohydrate for your blood sugar to go up. Just like it's a normal physiological response when you eat fat for your blood fat levels to go up. That is normal. And we need to really caution against this obsession that I know some people have, a small minority of people, about trying to flatline. And there are certain influencers out there that have all of these hacks to kind of flatten the line. I don't think we should be promoting that. I don't think that's healthy because, again, it's one piece of a huge puzzle in terms of how we respond to food and how food impacts our health. What we do know is that there's different features that you can measure from a continuous glucose monitor. So typically in nutrition research, we've looked at something called the area under the curve. So if you eat something that has carbohydrates, we've measured the 2-hour area under the glucose curve. And that's typically how we look at how a food impacts the glucose response. But we actually know it's a lot more complicated from that. When you look at a trace from a continuous glucose monitor, there's lots of different features we can look at that tell us something slightly different related to health. What we know is that about 25% of people get a dip about 2 to 4 hours after they consume carbohydrates. And we know from our own research that those that have dips tend to eat a lot more calories, about 300 calories more over the day. They tend to eat their next meal sooner than another individual. They tend to feel more hungry. They tend to have less energy and feel less alert. We also know that you can get multiple oscillations throughout the day. And we know that those oscillations are important in terms of blood sugar control. And we also know the peak, so how quickly it rises and how high it goes, is important in relation to inflammation. And there's quite a lot of evidence now showing how different features are related to different intermediary health measures. So, for example, we've published ourselves research showing that the peak is very strongly related to inflammation. We know that inflammation is important in terms of underpinning risk factor for many chronic diseases like type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease. We also know that for people who have a high glycemic index diet, i.e. the kind of foods that cause these big peaks in glucose, they go on to develop higher levels of cardiovascular disease and other kind of morbidities, so ill health. What we don't have yet, and this is where we do need to caution, is it's only recently that healthy individuals, i.e. people that aren't living with diabetes, have been wearing continuous glucose monitors. And so where there is some contention is we don't yet have the evidence of following these individuals, these healthy individuals that have been wearing continuous glucose monitors, and seeing how these features play out in terms of long-term disease risk, i.e., death from cardiovascular disease, etc. But I think the evidence relating to the glycemic index effect is really quite strong. And I think this is a case where, do we as nutritionists, do we wait until we get those hard clinical endpoints to give advice? Or do we say, look, based on our mechanistic understanding, based on what we can infer from other metrics, we think that it would be sensible to try and reduce excessive prolonged peaks. But again, I'd caution that with how I started the answers to normal physiological response. What we're just saying, if you're eating foods that you're constantly like on this roller coaster, I think the evidence shows that you may eat more food, you are likely to have higher levels of inflammation. And if that is sustained over a very long period of time, it may increase your risk of chronic disease. But if you're just moving around like, you would be on a normal healthy diet where you are having carbohydrates in your food, then I wouldn't worry too much.
And so what you have kind of explained is then what gets so simplified on social media, and that is this obsession almost to flatten the curve, isn't it? To do anything, to eat your food in different order, to flatten sort of that curve and to stop the peaks. But actually, when you explain it, that the amount of peaks over a long exposure of your lifetime maybe do contribute to the inflammation, it sort of makes sense that might be a good idea to sort of look and be a little bit more aware of how you react to carbohydrates, for example.
Yeah, and I think it's about, also listening to your own body. And, I wore a continuous glucose monitor for the first time a couple of years ago. And I've worked in nutritional research for 25 years and made very few modifications to my diet as I've learned more. When I wore the continuous glucose monitor, a couple of things happened. That despite being a nutrition scientist that works on post-meal responses, it was a real like, wow, this is really happening in real time to my body. So it can be used as a kind of motivational tool to, okay, food is impacting me in the here and now, not in 50 years' time or 20 years' time. But also, I found that I had these big glucose dips. And typically, when I was collecting my children from school, I'd be walking home. And so often I would get shaky, I would feel dizzy, I'd get like hot sweats. This is before I was perimenopausal. So, like whatever, 8 years ago. And I used to feel awful. And then I'd come home and I'd literally, in order to kind of stop this dizziness, I'd be gorging on whatever sweets or chocolate I could find. I wore continuous glucose monitor. I was walking home one day from school, happened to see that when I was experiencing that on the monitor, I was having one of these big dips. So for me personally, that was a great moment because I was like, okay, I wasn't so worried about these peaks, etc., because I'm relatively healthy. But it was a real like, wow, this is why I'm feeling like this. And so I modified the typical kind of lunches I was having. And it's benefited me in the here and now in terms of how I feel. And I think that there are instances like that where continuous glucose monitors can be really helpful. Also, you often hear of people saying, I don't know, about half an hour after having a certain lunch, they feel like kind of a bit hot and a bit kind of heart racy, etc. Quite often that's because you're having a really big peak in glucose. But I think, Danny, what we should be cautious about is trying to flatten the curve. We should be cautious about how much we're focusing on it, because again, and I know I say this all the time, but it's one piece of a huge puzzle. And I think we need to be cautious about these hacks, because whilst there are different things that we can do to reduce our glucose peaks, we should only do them if they're just simple to integrate into part of our lives. There's lots of attention over the last few weeks in the media about meal ordering and about when you go to a restaurant, ordering your vegetables, waiting 10 minutes, then eating your carbohydrate, or you then eat your meat and then wait and then eat your carbohydrates. I don't know about you, but I certainly don't want to sit on eating my food that way. And so, yes, there's some tricks we can do to help eat, but I think we need to think of the bigger picture and not over focus personally.
Do you know, the first time I heard about a hack like this was that you could separate your tuna sandwich and you could have the filling, your tuna sandwich filling first, and then the sandwich maybe and the lettuce or whatever later. And I think I was telling my mum what came up, and she was just saying, this is such a ridiculous thing for you to even entertain. I hope you don't even try and ever have your sandwich like that. And thought, no, I won't, because I love a tuna sandwich and I won't eat it in that order. It's a bit mad.
Yeah, I think it's crazy. And, there's lots of evidence coming out, around time of day as well. And actually, we've got some really interesting new research that's going to be published very soon that's looked at premenopausal versus postmenopausal women, and looked at the blood glucose response. So also we call it the blood sugar response or blood glucose response after meals. And what we found was that postmenopausal women have quite a big time of day effect. So what I mean by this is we know on average, if you consume carbohydrates in the morning, you have a lower blood sugar response to a meal compared to if you consume them later in the day. What our research has shown is this effect is more pronounced in postmenopausal women. So what this means is if you're premenopausal, yes, you might have a slightly bigger blood sugar response to the same food eaten in the afternoon compared to if you had it in the morning. But if you're postmenopausal women, it's even bigger size effect, meaning that maybe that's another thing we can think about. If you like your cake and you're happy to have it mid-morning rather than, in the afternoon, it's little things like that that we can do. But again, if you like your cake in the afternoon, you don't want it in the morning, don't change it all just because of that. Because accumulatively, these small things can add up. And if you can incorporate them and still have the pleasure from food, great. But what worries me is people making big changes to their pleasure about food that actually only make a small increment in terms of things like their blood sugar or their overall kind of health outcomes from these changes.
Absolutely. And I always compare the talk about blood sugar levels a bit like what I do. So with menopause and cancer, we have a laser focus on helping all female cancer survivors that have been put into a treatment-induced menopause. So we are in no competition with any other charity. There are so many amazing cancer charities out there, and we sort of add an extension, a laser focus to what they already do. And with the blood sugar conversation, it's almost the same. It's a laser focus on a particular area of how our diet impacts our body and what happens on the inside, but it's only one laser focus, and you could have 25 other laser focuses on, or even more, on other responses within your body, isn't it? It's just a little bit exaggerated because it gets a lot of limelight, for example. From your research or what you have learned over all these years, would hormone replacement therapy help a woman with blood sugar control if she's in postmenopause, or do we not know that yet?
Yeah, so our research shows that for those that are taking HRT, they behave a lot more like premenopausal women. We know this obviously for many other different outcomes as well. So we see this for our blood sugar responses, we see for our blood fat responses. We also see it for the very traditional health measures that have been looked at in the past. So for blood pressure, for blood lipids, so things like your LDL cholesterol as well. For visceral fat, whilst it doesn't totally prevent that postmenopausal change in your body distribution, it somewhat attenuates it in many people. Obviously, there's some people that are more responsive than other people. But we've just recently completed some analysis from our ZOE Predict cohort of individuals who have followed the ZOE program. This is, in simple terms, a very healthy eating style program. And they follow it for 18 weeks. And we've just completed some analysis in over 15,000 peri and postmenopausal women, where we've looked at symptoms, and we've looked at how following the healthy eating regime improves symptoms. I was quite skeptical when we started to look at this, because I'm very skeptical that diet can have much of an impact on your symptoms. There is some research that shows that following an overall dietary pattern can somewhat improve your symptoms. And then there's hundreds and hundreds of studies looking at different supplements that are all inconsistent, because there's no silver bullet. But actually, when we did the analysis that we've just recently submitted for publication, so it's not out there yet, what we found was that when people followed a healthy eating pattern, when they improved their overall diet quality, and I'm not talking about single food here, but when they improved their overall diet quality, they had a significant reduction in nearly all of their symptoms. And this was in a level of about 20 to 35% in terms of a reduction in the severity of the symptoms. And we looked at symptoms in terms of how many symptoms they had, but also the severity. And we came up with this particular kind of score. And we saw this significant reduction in the severity score when people followed a healthy diet. And I think that's really encouraging. And what I would like to emphasize in that, it's just about overall healthy diet. It's not about a silver bullet. It's not about just focusing on your blood sugar or just taking a supplement. And I thought, I was skeptical and I was surprised. And I love it when I'm skeptical and I'm really wrong. That's the best thing as a scientist, is always actually being wrong.
And it doesn't surprise me. So we have a Facebook group with a couple of thousand people after cancer, and they have so many conversations about everything. And every now and then a woman pops in and says, I've got horrible hot flushes. What have you, lovely lot? What have you taken that's helped? And we have so many different strategies that we've taught people over the years, from complementary therapies to non-hormonal prescribable options. Of course, we talk about hormones, everything. But every now and then you have a woman that says, I have cut out sugar, for example, or I have done this, and I can't tell you, I believe my symptoms have disappeared because of it, or have reduced because of it. And of course, that is anecdotal evidence. But over the last many years of being in this space, you can't ignore so much of this anecdotal evidence. And so it's just wonderful for you to have done this on 15,000 women. It's just incredible, isn't it? The power of food is amazing. And if someone then compared that to, say, some drugs like antidepressants, like hormone replacement therapy, like many other pharmaceutical interventions, you often don't get a much bigger benefit than 25 to 30% in the best of cases, right?
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is we looked at this in people who were taking HRT and people who weren't. And we saw a bigger benefit in those who weren't taking HRT, but we still saw a significant benefit in those taking HRT. I am the cautionary scientist, as you know, Danny, so I do need to
Yeah.
caution by really variable, and so whilst I give you the average,
Mm.
saying up to about 35% is the average, there will
Yeah.
some that are going to not respond to these changes, and there is some people who respond
Mm.
to it really well. The other thing that we found is that as people lose weight, you see a significant reduction in symptoms. We've seen from cross-sectional analysis, which is analysis in one point in time, that people who carry more weight, so are living with overweight or obesity, those individuals tend to experience more symptoms and more severe symptoms.
Mm.
But when we've looked again at this interventional data, we see if people reduce their BMI, so reduce their whether they're overweight or obese, then you have a reduction in the severity of symptoms.
Mm.
The challenge with this is that obviously when you're postmenopausal, you lose estrogen, your body fat depots change, etc. Also if you're suffering from symptoms like lack of sleep, anxiety, depression, etc., etc., you're less likely to want to be motivated to be physically active, maybe less likely to want to eat healthy. So it is a really vicious circle. And this is where I think the real challenge is that we know it's worse for people that are living with overweight or obesity, but menopause in itself is partly causing that as well. And how do you get out of that cycle? And this is where I think some of the evidence around diet could be, a nice kind of exit tool almost to help.
Absolutely. Because most people in our community are tinkering with it anyway.
Yeah.
Because once you are faced with, gosh, this mortality is not a given to all of us until we're in our 90s. Once you're faced with that, of course, what you put into this machine, our fuel, is very much on many people's radar, whether we're able to make the changes or not, whether it's the right time to make the changes, whether we have the energy to make the changes or not is a whole other story. And it is really a mission of mine to empower people to make the changes. So it's kind of like translating all of the amazing research that you have done, and it now includes women, because I remember talking to you before, a lot of research hasn't been done on women, of how we can help women then take that action so that they can reap the benefits of the 25 to hopefully 30% in symptom reduction. That would be great. I said something earlier that I know will worry a lot of people at home, and I said that by using hormone replacement therapy, you can reduce that blood sugar response, that massive sort of spike, and flatten the curve a little bit. But what I'd like to know from you is, are there other ways that we could do that without supplementing the hormones back in? Because many people would have been told it's not a possibility for them.
Yeah. So there's two things we could do in terms of kind of broad areas. One is change how we eat, and then the other is change what we eat.
Mm.
And so I don't think we should eliminate carbohydrates from our diet. It is obviously the carbohydrates that cause the increase in blood sugar. We also know from our research that postmenopausal, perimenopausal women tend to eat more refined carbohydrates for whatever reason. And this might be linked, for example, to sleep. We know if you don't sleep well, the reward centers in your brain are actively driving you to consume more refined carbohydrates. So again, it's kind of like, we have to be compassionate to ourselves that there's lots kind of fighting against us. But what we can do is we can think a bit more carefully about the types of carbohydrates that we're eating and the types of foods that we're eating. So a simple thing is to try and change what I call fast carbohydrates to slow carbohydrates. So carbohydrates that are absorbed really rapidly, and these tend to be the refined carbohydrates, the white bread, the white pasta, the white rice, etc. Change them for slower versions like whole grain pasta, whole grain rice, whole grain bread. It's not going to have a huge impact, but it's going to have some impact. But really importantly, make sure you're not eating carbohydrates on their own. So if you have fibre with the carbohydrates, if you have fat with the carbohydrates and protein, that changes the rate at which your stomach empties. So it changes the rate at which the blood sugar is coming into your body. So it can be removed at a similar rate to what it's coming in. Also, we know, for example, the protein releases particular hormones, including insulin, but other hormones that also helps with the removal of the sugar, so the glucose from your bloodstream. So trying to actually add food in rather than take food away. And I think that's the policy that most nutritional scientists, most good nutritionists will always have, it's not about taking away the things that you like. It's about what can you add into what you like in order to make that meal or that food a bit healthier. And I think it's, well, a way, about moving away from the very traditional thinking, oh, fat's bad for us. Hopefully, maybe the message is out there that fat, if it's the right fat, isn't bad for us. So if you're having pasta, putting lashings of olive oil on is going to make that a lot healthier for many reasons, not just because of reducing your blood glucose response, but in addition, like the polyphenols, etc., but it will also reduce your blood glucose response. So when you think of a meal, make sure you're getting a balance, that it's not just carbohydrate focused, it's got fat, protein, and fibre in it. Eating the kind of foods that we know, like pulses, for example, that they're high in fibre, have some protein in them. Trying where we can to add some of these very healthy principles into your diet is good. And then thinking about how you eat. I think, most people probably know the types of food that they should avoid, the types of food that they should eat. But I think what's a new area of research that I think is particularly interesting is the how you eat. So we know that eating carbohydrate-rich foods later in the day, particularly late in the evening, is not great for us. We'll have a high blood sugar response. We also tend to feel more hungry the next day if you eat later in the evening. There's some fantastic research looking at that that's very interesting. We also know how quickly you eat your food impacts your blood sugar response. And this is an area that I'm excited by as well, that we know if you eat your food really quickly, that you have an increase, a higher blood glucose response. We also know you go on to eat a lot more food. So we know that you can eat, 20, 30% more calories if you eat your food quickly compared to if you slow it down. So if you slow down your rate of eating by 20%, so let's say you typically eat your lunch in 8 minutes. If you could eat it 10, 11 minutes, you naturally will reduce your intake of calories. The evidence shows without consciously thinking about it by about 15%. But you'll also that blood sugar peak. And these are kind of simple things, just put your knife and fork down between each mouthful. Don't overthink it, but just go back to that old way that we used to eat, maybe with the family or, taking our time in the moment, enjoying the food. So strategies like that, there is some evidence emerging around time-restricted eating as well, and in terms of blood responses, but also in terms of menopause symptoms. I don't think there's enough data yet to say, hey, everyone go practice time-restricted eating. And by this, I mean eating within a small eating window for listeners that aren't familiar with this. So eating within, let's say, a 10-hour eating window, so your body fasts for a 14-hour period overnight. I think these are kind of things to watch out for, that there might be, interesting data coming out. Anecdotally, I know that many people have said it helps with symptoms. And anecdotally, I know that it might impact as well the blood glucose.
And I'd love to get you back on when you're able to tell us more about this study and the research you've done on menopausal women and the symptom reduction as a last question. And then I'll let you go, because I know you're a mum to a young teenager. And we know that so many of our young adult population, teenagers, eat about 70% of all of the diet is ultra-processed food. And as a mum to 3 teenagers myself, who has been eating a very healthy diet for over 11 years now, since my own cancer diagnosis, and really immersed myself into this, I feel frustrated at the government. I feel despondent. I feel exhausted that there is such a big variety of really bad foods out there. And when I have conversations like that with you today, I want to empower everyone at home to do really good jobs for themselves. But it's also highly frustrating because I think the whole system is kind of like working against us. What's your feeling on that? Like, how much can we do as individuals? And is the government or is the world setting us up for a failure? As my last question to you, almost.
Yeah, I think it's so tough, Danny. And my children eat far too much ultra processed food. They eat far too much crap. When they come home from school and they're ravenous, I might be in the middle of a meeting. Okay, I could take ownership and actually not buy the crap that's in the house, but we're all human and, this is the reality. And as a nation, adolescents, children are eating actually 65 to 70%, like you say, ultra processed, which we know is bad for us for a whole host of reasons. The problem is we live in a food landscape that we are not evolved physiologically to deal with. And this is where I think the blood glucose thing is quite interesting, because it is quite contentious with lots of people saying, oh, it's normal, which, yes, I agree, it is normal. But actually, what happens when you process foods, you change not just the ingredients that are in them, so they tend to have less healthy ingredients, more unhealthy ingredients. So they have less fibre, less healthy fats, less, bioactives like polyphenols. They have more unhealthy nutrients like more sugar, additives, emulsifiers, etc. But you change the structure of food. And actually, before I started on this whole journey with ZOE, looking at personalised responses, my previous 20 years research was looking at food structure and how changing the food structure changes how you process that food. And our bodies haven't evolved, in my opinion, to be able to, in the long term, be healthy with the kind of food where this structure is changed such that you get the fast carbohydrate that I talked about earlier, rather than low carbohydrate, where, we know from my own studies, just grinding oats versus eating the very traditional whole oats, can double the size of your blood sugar response. And so we have a big problem because we have not evolved at pace at which the food landscape has evolved. But we are within the landscape that we are within. How it's going to be tackled, my gosh, everyone about this, from government to industry. I don't think industry are out there trying to kill us personally, but many will disagree with that. I think that it needs to be joined up. We need to be joined up with food industry, with government, with people on the ground. We need to go back to schools, teaching kids how to cook, teaching them the basics, and not just like they do at the moment. I think 2 sessions in primary school related to healthy eating, because I go in I try to my working parent guilt and go in and do those sessions at my kids' school when they have. And I think we start from the kids being young. But I do think it's really challenging for, particularly, I think, if you're a full-time working parent, having the brain space to think, how can I feed my child healthy? Food that they also like. I don't know about your kids, but not touch pulses. I know that if I could just get them eating 2 portions of pulses a week, that would dramatically change their health. And so I think this is where I have a lot of parenting guilt, and I think a lot of parents do. And I would say, look, it's stacked against us because it's easier to feed them unhealthy, accessible food. What I would say is that start from some really simple strategies. And what we know is 20% on average of our energy comes from breakfast. On average, 25% of our energy comes from snacks. Maybe what we could do is focusing on some very simple strategies. Find some healthy snacks that they will eat. Fingers crossed, nuts, seeds, that sort of thing. Maybe that's a bit ambitious. Try and find a healthy breakfast that they will eat. And then, in time, kind of worry about the rest. But I think if we tackle just one of those things, I think rather than trying to be like, well, this is how I am, Danny, every Sunday I'm like, right, that's it. Next week, my kids are going to eat every meal healthy. Doesn't happen. So my strategy this month is my kids are going to have healthier snacks.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you say this, because I'm the queen of snack boxes. And I know you can't know this, but in our community, I say the biggest transformation to my own diet sustainably over the years has been to make myself, because it starts with myself and then the kids and the husband and everyone will follow, is to make myself 1 healthy snack box a day. And I have a rule. It's a minimum of 6 ingredients, and whatever goes in, peanut butter, apple, cheese, nuts and seeds, whatever it is goes in, and I prepare it in the morning. So 2 rules, 6 ingredients. And over the years, Sarah, I have put mountains of good foods into my body because of those snack boxes. And it has revolutionized my diet over the years. I haven't got any evidence to prove it, but if you ever do a study, we can do that.
Well, do you know what? I know we need to finish up, but I'm passionate about. So if I could just quickly finish on snacking. Anecdotally, there is evidence to support it. We know that on average, 20 to 25% of our energy comes from snacks. We also know from some of our ZOE Predict research, that it's not snacking itself that's bad, it's what people snack on that's the problem. And then we know from a randomized controlled trial that I did about 8 years ago, where we asked people, change your typical snacks to consuming nuts. So it was one simple swap. So we recruited people who said they were typical snackers. So they did consume the UK average of 25% of their energy from snacks. And so we randomly allocated half the people to eat UK traditional snacks that we designed, and the other half of the people to consume nuts. We had a huge difference in health outcomes that actually equated to a 30% reduction in cardiovascular disease risk when you looked at the endpoint measures. And so, Danny, I think that a
Wow.
takeaway, if we can all go and do exactly what you're doing. I think after this, though, you need to post some ideas
I will. I
of.
have started. I was on a panel the other day and I said, my top tip is snack boxes. And everyone's like, what? And I said, let me show you. And it's transformed. And, on days where I haven't got the energy to cook really healthy meals, I go to bed and I'm like, well, I had some celery and some nuts in my snack box and a bit of goat cheese. And I feel like I've done well.
I think it is. It's small changes. And there's this trainer, Lavinia, who is on Instagram. A big shout out to anyone that doesn't follow her to follow her, that has a whole following, and it's all about exercise snacking. She's got a book coming
Yeah.
out in a couple of weeks, and it's about, look, don't try and make it a big thing. If you can fit a 60-second exercise snack in. So I think after this, everyone needs to be doing some 60-second exercise snacks, and also eat your snacks.
That's it. And I will let you go. Otherwise, your secretary is going to shout at me because I know it's late and you're very busy. And I know you'll come back on to tell us more about your research. And thank you for being brilliant, Sarah, and for making time for us.
Oh, thank you, Danny. I love chatting to you.
Oh my gosh, I really enjoyed talking to Sarah. She's just such a powerhouse of a woman and she's always been so supportive of our projects. And of course, I squeal with delight when someone backs up what many of us have been doing with the evidence. And so that is by transforming our snacks can have a huge impact on our overall health. I think that is so interesting that there is lots of research to back that up. And so again, if we go back to what Sarah said, if about 25% of an average person's calorie comes from snacking, then of course that would be really interesting to improve how we snack. You would have heard me talk about the snack boxes. It's nothing new for you, but it was something new for Sarah. I'm very pleased I was able to tell her. But I do really think it's transformed how I've been eating over the last many years. And not so much day to day or week to week, but really in the summary of what I've been eating by adding all these lovely fruits and vegetables and pulses sometimes and nuts and whatever I put into my snack boxes over the months and over the years. It has really added to my overall intake of especially plant foods, and I'm sure that had a positive effect on perhaps my symptoms, also my overall health. And so these are little things that we can all do in our everyday life. And as I want all of our podcast episodes to be an action episode or an action podcast for you, I really want to encourage you to take action. What is it that you've learned the most from the conversation with Dr. Sarah Berry? Is it that you now have more knowledge on your blood sugar response, what it means when you are in a menopausal body, that this is a disadvantage, but that there are strategies that you can implement, especially if you can't have hormone replacement therapy, for example. So it's really important to know. Often people worry when there is a narrative like that on social media. They say, oh gosh, it'll just worry so many more of us that we are at a disadvantage here. But I think we need to know, because only when we know can we do something about it. Because I remember so vividly walking down a street in London after an appointment when I was preparing for my oophorectomy, for my ovaries to be removed. And the doctor said that my risks of heart disease, bone disease, and perhaps, brain problems is going to be huge if he puts me into the menopause with surgery at an earlier age. And that really worried me. And all that needed to happen really then was this doctor saying, you will be at a disadvantage, but there are strategies and here is what you can do. And we'll talk about it when the time is relevant. I just needed that add-on because as it was, I felt very much left to my own devices, thinking this is very doom and gloom. What I want to be saying to you is turn this into an action. We've heard from Sarah Berry, we've heard what the research is. How can we now use that knowledge and make it happen for us? And even if it's thinking, cut up the apple and cheese for yourself, buy a new tub of peanut butter and have a couple of bits of apple and peanut butter a couple of times a week, or whatever it is that you want to do, that you think you can implement into your diet. and then commit to yourself, because we need to start with committing to ourselves, committing that we're worth the change, the energy, and the investment. And once we've committed, things usually start to flow. I hope those snack boxes will flow for you. I can't wait to talk to you on next week's podcast episode. I am really thoroughly enjoying speaking to all of our guests, to getting the information out there, and the fact that we're still here talking about it, and that so many more people are now listening. Ever since we've been listed on the Macmillan website, for example, on their cancer resources in the UK, it's meant the world to us that such a great big organization believes in what we do. And I don't think I'm doing this together. Yes, I have a great team working with us to get the information out to you, but we're all in this together. You, as much as me, are all navigating menopause after cancer. And although I know no one wants to be in our club, I'm glad we're all here doing this together. Now go on and make your snack box. And I'm going to make mine, and I'll speak to you next week.